The night I found out my best friend had stolen my identity, the woman who wore my clothes and lived my life, everything collapsed. Thousands vanished. My future was gone. She looked me dead in the eye and sneered, "I deserve it more than you." That's when I realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was war. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to our channel and leave your comments. My name is Amanda Collins, I'm 29 years old, and I live in Denver, Colorado. I grew up in a tidy, modest house on the edge of town where my parents taught middle school and summer reading camps. Our home smelled like coffee in the morning and cinnamon on the weekends. It smelled like secondhand books and laundry detergent. Those small, constant things gave me a sense of safety I carried into adulthood, the belief that honesty had a shape, a rhythm, a quiet reward. Work hard, save, be careful. That was the melody my parents hummed while they ironed shirts and checked report cards. I learned to measure success in small, responsible increments. A promotion was an achievement. Paying rent on time felt like a quiet victory. A weekend away was a treat, not an indulgence. I liked my life because it felt stable, because it was the result of steady choices. I liked the idea that steadiness built something durable. And then there was Rachel Green. She was the foil to everything I was taught to be. Where I was steady, Rachel was electric. Where I was prudent, she was impulsive. She arrived in a room like sunlight through a window, sudden warmth and a tendency to make everything brighter, and occasionally a little blinding. She had a smile that made people trust her before she said a word. She had style that looked effortless, like a glossy ad in a fashion magazine. She had a way of making you feel like whatever you were doing at that exact moment was the most important thing in the world. Rachel and I met in our sophomore marketing class. She sat down beside me with a latte and a book I'd been eyeing and said, "You look like someone who takes good notes. Mind if I copy?" I laughed and offered half of my sandwich. Within a week, we were inseparable. Study sessions that turned into 2 a.m. drives, nights where we built ridiculous vision boards and swore we'd conquer New York by 30. I loved her without reservation because she made life exciting. I loved her because she listened without judgment. She made me believe it was okay to wish for more. After graduation, life pulled us in different directions but never really apart. I fell into a marketing coordinator job at a boutique agency downtown and slowly worked my way up. I became the person who double-checked invoices and reconciled social media calendars, the person who liked to be done early on Fridays and who savored the satisfaction of a clean budget. Rachel hopped through gigs like stepping stones, sales, real estate attempts, a short-lived influencer push, and then a consulting contract that seemed to pay more than she let on. Her social media filled with rooftop cocktails, soft-focus selfies, and spontaneous weekend getaways. She looked like she had it all. I envied her the way people admire the sun, with a little squinting. When people asked me to describe Rachel, I always found myself saying the same thing: magnetic. She pulled people in and she rarely, if ever, apologized for the wake she left behind. She was generous with laughter and terrible with boundaries. And the way she charmed everyone around her, men, women, bosses, made it easy to forgive her for the times she forgot to call back or the rent check that arrived late. Forgiveness became our religion. There were early hints, tiny decisions, and shrugged excuses that something about Rachel's life was a bit precarious. She'd borrow my jacket and never return it. She'd promise to split a bill and then forget her half. There were nights she'd arrive at my apartment with new things: heels with tags still on, a statement coat, an expensive candle. And when I asked where she found the money, she'd flash a grin and say, "Perks. You know the people I meet." That answer satisfied me because it satisfied the part of me that wanted to believe in magic. That luck, charm, or charisma could conjure a life others only dreamed about. We shared everything else, though. I told her about my plan to travel, to finally take the long-awaited trip to Italy I'd been saving for since age 23. I told her about the spreadsheet where I'd tracked airline price drops, the meticulous list of hostels then upgraded to small boutique hotels, the prepaid wine tasting in Tuscany. She laughed and promised to help me pick outfits, said she'd be the most dramatic tourist guide. "Amanda, you're finally doing the thing," she said, and squeezed my hand. I felt buoyant. I felt like the future was a hallway with doors I could choose freely. The first major time Rachel stayed with me was during a summer when her landlord claimed there was a termite infestation that required her to be out for a month. She came with an army of suitcases and a suitcase worth of reasons why her things couldn't be moved into storage. She gave me the teary-eyed speech about being between leases, and I gave her a bedroom and a spare closet. With her there, my apartment felt full and loud in a way I'd missed. Music late into the night, friends I'd never met lounging in my kitchen, the kind of company that made even doing dishes feel like a party. At first, everything was cozy. Rachel made coffee in my battered French press I'd had since college. She rearranged my throw pillows with an artistic eye, and she introduced new recipes that turned my sad Tupperware lunches into Instagrammable meals. But the cracks were the kind of things you file away as quirks. A sweater gone missing and then discovered under a pile of her coats. A lipstick missing from my vanity that showed up in a drawer labeled Rachel's Favorites. I chalked it up to the chaos of two women living together temporarily. I told myself that friendship sometimes meant forgiving. Then came the day I noticed my debit card wasn't where I'd left it. I tore through my bag in the apartment, heart pounding in an odd, dislocated rhythm. Rachel sauntered in from work with a coffee in one hand and my card nonchalantly balanced on a magazine. "Borrowed it for a coffee," she said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I remember my cheeks burning with an odd mix of embarrassment and anger. The sensation of being a fool for letting someone whose shoes cost more than my rent handle what I considered private, practical things. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself she'd been my friend since college. I told myself I'd get over it. But the real betrayal was not a missing sweater or a taken card. It was a pattern of entitlement that preyed on the small, tender generosity I gave my friends. It was when the small things became a map of what she believed she could take without consequence. 6 months later, 2 weeks before I was due to fly out to Italy, I left my purse on the kitchen counter as I ran upstairs to finish packing. My wallet contained cash, my Italy itinerary, and a credit card I'd reserved for emergencies. A card I rarely used and had kept more out of habit than necessity. That night, we sat on the couch, ate bad pizza, drank wine, and plotted outfits in between gossip. Rachel kept glancing at my phone with an expression I later realized was calculation more than curiosity. I didn't notice when she excused herself to the bathroom. I didn't notice the slight delay when she came back. I didn't notice the way she moved around the kitchen with a purpose I mistook for help. I didn't notice the minute hand on the clock, or the way the air suddenly felt heavier until it was too late. 2 weeks after she left, my inbox filled with alerts. "Suspicious activity detected," the subject line read. For a hot second, I convinced myself it was a phishing scam. For a hot second, I wished it were fraud. An easy villain to blame. Then I opened the email and my world telescoped into currency and dates and locations. Plane tickets to Miami. Reservations at a boutique hotel I'd never considered. A string of purchases at stores that whispered expensive names I knew only from magazines. Spa packages, designer dresses, a lunch at a restaurant I'd once seen Rachel tag and admired. The same photo of a cocktail she'd posted while captioning, "Treat yourself." My stomach dropped and settled into a low, cold place. I scrolled through Rachel's Instagram. There she was, sun on her shoulders, a cocktail in hand, new earrings glinting, smile wide in photographs taken in places my credit card had paid for. It felt like watching someone else's life move through someone else's frame. There was no immediate malice in her photos, just a thrum of contentment. But behind each glossy frame was a bill that belonged to me. I called her. My voice was steadier than I felt. "Did you use my card?" There was a pause that widened into something clinical. "Oh, come on, Mandy, seriously?" she said finally. "I used it once. You left it out. I thought you wouldn't mind. I'll pay you back." Her tone, dismissive, almost bored, felt like a lash. It was one thing to borrow a sweater. It was another to spend thousands of dollars on someone else's life as if it were free. The charges totaled over $12,000. For someone like me, $12,000 was real money. A lifetime of dinners, rent buffers, and the exact trip I'd been planning. It wasn't a small debt to be shrugged away with a casual, "I'll Venmo you." When I said that to her, she laughed. "You're being dramatic. You always are. You're fine. I'll pay you back when I can." She never paid me back. Instead, I watched her erase me from the only part of her life they would both notice. She blocked my number, removed me from social media, and when neighbors from our old building asked about her, she lied. She wrote fiction where our friendship had become distant because of my temper. I watched messages from mutual friends asking me to patch things up and wondered why I, the one robbed, was the person expected to apologize. The bank asked questions I wished I could answer. The legal definitions were cold and mechanical. Because I hadn't pressed charges and because there was evidence she had the physical card in her possession while staying over, filing it as fraud was thorny. I worked endless hours on hold with customer service, parsing sentences like they were splinters. I canceled the Italy trip to focus on fighting the charges and paying down what remained. I moved from a place of dreaming to a place of repairing. Everything about that period smelled of defeat. The city I loved, the crisp air of autumn, the light that made the Rockies look like a watercolor, felt like a backdrop to a different person's life. I started to recognize every small sign of betrayal in the world around me. The way mailboxes could conceal secrets, the way a cheap coffee could be a front for something meaner. I began to distrust the easy assumptions I'd made about people, that your friends are your people, that people care for your belongings the way you do. Yet anger arrived in stages. At first there was a dull, shamey red that hummed under every task. Later, that red heated into purpose. I replayed the conversation with Rachel in my head, not to relive the pain, but to find leverage, the crack where I could wedge myself free. What surprised me was a quiet, precise realization. Rachel had not only stolen money, she had stolen my posture with the world. She had made me small with the audacity of her actions. She had not only taken funds, she had taken a dream I had planned for years and spent it on lashings of luxury for herself. That felt crueler than any balance sheet. Once the shock subsided enough for thought to become something like strategy, I made a list. Not of revenge at first. I had never been that person, but of what was necessary to repair my life. Calls to the bank. Copies of receipts. Photos of Rachel wearing items charged to my card. Screenshots. Witness statements from the neighbor who occasionally saw her carrying my tote. I cataloged everything like evidence on a kitchen counter, because I was tired of feeling like evidence was only ever found by those who had the loudest voices. Then something happened that I hadn't planned. The list of practical repairs mutated into a list of consequences. I realized that there were things Rachel hadn't considered. In between her photos and nights out, she had left footprints. She was careless with how she portrayed her life online. She loved attention, and attention leaves traces, sometimes in tags, sometimes in photos where your card is in the background, sometimes in the gleam of a receipt someone posts as a haul. She documented herself the way people do when they wish the world to believe in the story they are telling. That was a door. And I, exhausted by the idea of being some muffled victim, decided to open it. But I also knew there was danger in anger. I had to be careful. Not for moral reasons, necessarily, but because I had everything to lose. She was reckless. I could be meticulous. She was loud. I could be methodical. I began to map out what she wanted to keep. Friends who thought she was generous, employers who admired her hustle, social capital that let her slip from one expensive weekend to the next. If she had the audacity to spend what I'd saved, she also had the arrogance to believe she could erase me. The first move, then, was gathering everything from receipts to screen grabs and holding them like ammunition. I took screenshots of her Miami photos and matched them to the bank statements. I circled dates and cross-checked places. I called everyone I could think of. The concierge who'd checked her into the boutique hotel, a sales associate at the boutique who smiled when he remembered the card used. I spent nights compiling notes until the ledger in my head looked like a map pinboard. In the meantime, I told myself to breathe. I kept walking to work through autumn light that smelled like wet leaves. I drank coffee at the place down the block that knew my name. I made dinner that tasted dull but real. There were moments when I laughed, small, brittle things that felt like a surprise to my own face. The human mind is good at making space for joy even when its edges are ragged. 2 months in, a message arrived from a mutual friend that jolted me. "Have you seen Rachel's new job?" "Big things," the message read. Attached was a screenshot of her LinkedIn, promoted to a role with a respectable title at an agency I'd once admired. She had posted an announcement with the kind of posed corporate smile that says, "Look at me. I belong here." My stomach twisted. She had used my money to buy a future she didn't earn and to build a resume that would give her even more credibility. The audacity of it tasted like iron. It was then that I felt the shape of my plan form. Not petty revenge, not a smear campaign, something cleaner, more surgical. If she had built a life on borrowed things, borrowed funds, borrowed credibility, borrowed grace, then the way to level the field was to show the world the pattern she'd created. But showing the world is a messy endeavor. It requires proof and courage and a tolerance for collateral noise. I spent the next week reading legal forums between client meetings, whispered lines of terms and rights. I took photographs of the receipts she'd left and compared dates to public social posts. I wrote possibilities in messy shorthand: confront, sue, report, or, the one that made my hands twitchy with excitement, expose in a way that made it impossible for her to pull the same stunt again. None were risk-free. All required more evidence. As I gathered more pieces, my anger clarified into intention. I was no longer a person merely reacting to theft. I was a person preparing to take back power. That meant organizing, concealing, and timing. It meant remembering the days when I'd stayed up late with Rachel mapping out futures and learning that sometimes friends change roles. Sometimes they are the protagonist, and sometimes the antagonist. In the little domestic battles of life, we learn the craft of getting up again. This was one of those times. Somehow, in the center of my hurt, I found a kernel of resolve that tasted like cold coffee and determination. And then came the call that made the plan necessary and urgent. As I was pulling together one last stack of evidence, I received an email from a boutique I'd never heard of before, asking if I'd like to collaborate on a feature story about influential women in the city. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I read its sender and recognized a name: a local writer who sometimes covered human interest stories for a site that had a modest but attentive readership. The writer wanted to know if I'd like to tell a story of recovery, of financial recovery, how I had bounced back after a setback. They wanted a raw account. In other words, a platform. Suddenly, the map felt smaller and more navigable. This was the doorway to speak before the story belonged solely to the person who'd stolen from me. It was not justice by legal decree, but it was a voice. If I could tell my story on my terms, with the receipts, with the dates, with photos, then I could puncture the bubble Rachel had tried to blow around herself. The temptation to call her and scream was real. The temptation to go to her door and make a scene even more intoxicating. But I recognized, in a way that felt almost religious, that the most devastating responses aren't noisy. They are incontrovertible. They are documents and timelines and truth. So I said yes to the writer. I spent 2 evenings composing a careful, measured piece, interlacing chronology with emotion. I sent it with attachments, bank statements obscured only where appropriate, photographs, a timeline. I would not be reckless. I would be credible. My anger would be disciplined into evidence. That night, sleep eluded me. I thought of the Italy brochure I had folded and tucked into a drawer, and of the photos of Rachel, which now felt like cruel postcards. I thought of my parents, who had always valued quiet integrity, and wondered how they would react. I imagined their faces when, over the phone, I told them what had happened. I braced for disappointment more than sympathy, and in that image I found a strange steadiness. The piece I submitted was not sensationalist. It was not a plea for pity. It was an account that started with a title and included a name, a date, and a trail of transactions. It landed with a soft thud in an inbox and then the sound of waiting. There is a peculiar kind of adrenaline that comes with initiating something that cannot be retracted. I walked the city the next day with my phone turned off, the crispness of the air puncturing the rawness of things. Inside, my plan felt both terrifying and inevitable. I told myself that I was doing the right thing, not only for myself, but potentially for others who might be left bereft by someone skilled at performance and poor at accountability. On a wet Tuesday afternoon, the writer called me. She was clear and compassionate and startlingly direct. "We'll publish, but we need a few more corroborations," she said. "Would you be able to provide some proof, like original receipts from the bank or confirmation emails from vendors?" I had the copies. I sent them. In the small hours that followed, my inbox pinged with one more message. Not from the writer, but from a number I had blocked. A single text. 2 words, "You'll regret it." The message should have frightened me. It didn't. What it did was sharpen something that was already hardening. It made the stakes painfully real. She knew. She had seen a change in tone in the way emails were being sent. She had the arrogance to threaten. I sat at my kitchen table where once we had spread outfits and dreamt of foreign streets and started to laugh, quiet and low. It sounded like a release valve. For the first time since the charges appeared in my account, I felt like myself again, not the nervous, apologetic version of me who had let a friend take advantage, but a person who could be precise, firm, and unafraid to stake a claim for what was hers. I slept, finally. The next morning, I woke to a city that looked unchanged, as if the world at large moved on regardless of our private calamities. But inside my inbox, a different kind of movement had begun. The story was scheduled. The editor asked for a photo. The writer was confident. I pressed my thumb to a receipt one more time, as if to prove it was real. There was still so much to plan. There was still a second act necessary to close the story on my terms. But the first act, reclaiming my voice, had begun. The rest would be about method, patience, and the slow unspooling of truth. I had already imagined a dozen possible outcomes. Rachel apologizing and returning the money, Rachel denying everything and doubling down, Rachel trying to sue for defamation, Rachel quietly moving away and starting over. I had prepared for many of them. But what I hadn't prepared for was how much I would learn about myself in the time between being wronged and seeking restitution. For now, the story was in motion. I had steadied my hand on the ledger of evidence and I had asked someone to listen. I had decided not to let shame keep me small. I had decided that if Rachel had the audacity to spend my life like a credit line, I would have the audacity to make sure her narrative was not the only one anyone read. And so I waited. Not in the helpless way that leaves a person paralyzed, but in the deliberate way of a player on a chessboard, fingers loose and ready to move. When I woke up the morning after sending my evidence to the writer, the air felt sharper, like the city itself knew something was shifting. The kind of morning where your breath comes out in clouds and every sound feels amplified. I brewed coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at my phone. No new threats. No apologies, just silence. That silence wasn't peace. It was the sound of a storm pulling itself together. Rachel had sent me that text. "You'll regret it." It wasn't a bluff. She wasn't the type to sit quietly and accept exposure. She would scramble, twist, and manipulate until she either silenced me or convinced the world she was the victim. But she didn't know me anymore. I wasn't the same Amanda who let her borrow sweaters and cards. I wasn't the same Amanda who believed laughter erased red flags. That Amanda was gone. This Amanda was building a war plan. The writer kept me updated. She'd spoken to a boutique manager who confirmed Rachel had purchased nearly $4,000 worth of items on a credit card that didn't match her name. A concierge verified her stay. Emails from airlines matched my bank statements. The evidence wasn't just convincing. It was airtight. 2 weeks later, the article went live. The headline wasn't dramatic, but it hit like a hammer. Denver woman says best friend stole thousands through identity fraud. It was factual, measured, and devastating. The story walked readers through my account, the friendship, the betrayal, the financial fallout. Screenshots of Rachel's public posts lined up with charges from my bank statements. Names of vendors confirmed her purchases. My name wasn't hidden. Neither was hers. By noon, the article had been shared hundreds of times. By evening, it was on local news aggregators. By nightfall, my phone buzzed nonstop with messages. Some were supportive. Strangers wrote things like, "I went through something similar. Thank you for speaking up." Others were vicious, calling me stupid for ever trusting someone with my card. But the message that made me sit down, trembling, came from one of Rachel's coworkers. She's been bragging about her promotion for weeks. After this, she's done here. HR is already investigating. Rachel had built her success on smoke. The article was a match. The next few days were chaos. Rachel's Instagram went dark. Her LinkedIn vanished. Friends who once fawned over her lifestyle now messaged me in shock. "I can't believe she'd do that to you." She called once, a blocked number. I answered, her voice was venom. "You think you've won? Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" I kept my tone steady. "What you did to yourself, Rachel." "I just told the truth. You ruined my career," she shrieked. "You've destroyed everything I worked for." I laughed, bitter, sharp. "Everything you stole, you mean? My money, my trust, my life." There was silence, then the soft click of her hanging up. It should have felt like victory. But revenge is never clean. It's messy, emotional, heavy. I felt relief, yes, but also grief, for the friendship that once felt like home. Still, she wasn't done. And I knew it. Rachel was clever. When her old tactics failed, she tried new ones. Mutual friends sent me screenshots of posts from burner accounts claiming I was jealous of Rachel, that I let her use the card, and then turned it into a sob story for attention. One account even claimed Rachel had loaned me money in the past and this was payback. Classic Rachel. Twist the narrative until the victim looks like the villain. I felt the anger rising again, that same hot flush in my chest. But this time, I didn't react emotionally. Instead, I doubled down on proof. I released another set of screenshots through the writer, direct text from Rachel admitting she'd used my card. A photo of her holding a shopping bag from the boutique, with the receipt in my name. Emails from the bank. The smear campaign fizzled out like a match in the wind. The article opened a door I hadn't considered before. Legal action. A local lawyer reached out, offering to help me pursue charges. "You have everything you need," she said. "This isn't just bad friendship. It's fraud." The thought of dragging Rachel to court terrified me, but the thought of letting her walk free terrified me more. So I agreed. Filing charges was like stepping onto a new battlefield. Rachel showed up to the first hearing looking nothing like the glamorous woman in her Instagram posts. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes plain. But her eyes? Still sharp, still calculating. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she launched into her performance. "She told me I could use the card," Rachel insisted. "She always said I could borrow things. We shared everything. She's making this bigger than it is." My lawyer slid a stack of documents onto the desk. Bank statements, receipts, screenshots, vendor testimonies. The evidence was irrefutable. I'll never forget the look on Rachel's face when the judge said, "This is not borrowing. This is theft." For once, her charm didn't work. Rachel was ordered to pay restitution. She was convicted of fraud. Her career in marketing, over. And just like that, the empire she'd built on lies collapsed. The months after the trial were surreal. I started to breathe again. My savings recovered slowly. Friends I thought I'd lost came back, apologizing for believing Rachel's stories. My company even promoted me, impressed by the resilience I'd shown through the ordeal. But the most important change wasn't financial. It was internal. I stopped apologizing for other people's mistakes. I stopped letting guilt dictate my boundaries. I realized that trust, once broken, is a lesson, not a prison. One evening, as I packed for a small weekend trip to California, my first since the Italy dream died, I looked at the suitcase and smiled. I wasn't afraid anymore. Rachel had thought she'd destroyed me. But in truth, she'd rebuilt me, stronger, wiser, sharper. Months passed. Then one morning, I received an anonymous email. No greeting, no name. Just one line. Rachel's in Los Angeles now. Watch your back. Attached was a screenshot of a new Instagram profile. Different name, same face. New followers, new career, new web of lies. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me burned with anger. How could she still try? How could she still think she could outrun the truth? But another part of me smiled, because now I knew exactly how she operated. And I wasn't the naive girl she once manipulated. This time, if Rachel wanted to play games, I was more than ready. People always ask me if I regret speaking up. If I regret losing my best friend, and the truth is, no. Because friendship built on lies isn't friendship at all. Rachel showed me that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people you'd take a bullet for. But she also showed me something else. That I am stronger than I ever knew. And that when someone tries to steal your life, the most powerful revenge is to build it back. Brighter, louder, and untouchable. If you liked my story, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with as many people as possible. Thanks for watching.